mine are not that good anymore.
I apologize. I should have been better prepared for this. I can't log into this because
You have it on. You have it on.
it's connected to my husband's phone. You know what? We'll do this. We'll do this. This is a small room. I see most of you have glasses, so your eyesight is pretty well.
Oh,
I'm gonna show you based off of my laptop.
I'll be your stand.
Oh, I love you so much. Thank you. I'll give this to you.
Is it still objectification if I let myself be objectified?
Right? So, all right then. So, I am basically going to talk about this theory that I'm working on. You know what? I'll make this even better and I'll go with inside of you. There's this theory that I'm working on that I've termed Abductive Empiricism. In essence, it's basically just empirical study using the logic of abduction, Abductive Empiricism. It's equal parts science and fiction. I know that we're all here for the fiction. I'll get to it in a little bit, but first we've got to trudge through the science. So my theory deals with this concept of interconnectedness. And in order to explore interconnectedness, we first need a base definition of it, which in essence, the concept of interconnectedness just touches on this idea that all entities in the universe are interrelated. And the reason I give you a base definition is because this concept shows up in multiple different discipline studies in multiple different types of ways. So in philosophy, thank you so much. We have Alfred North Whitehead, who created something called process philosophy. In essence, what he claims is that actual entities in the universe are connected through processes. So with this idea of interconnectedness, it begins with flow. In essence, everything influences and is influenced by everything else. It's a little bit intangible. But we pop on over to Karen Barad, who works in quantum physics, who came up with this idea of interaction. So what their concept of interaction, it claims the concrete definition, entities are not separate from other entities, but rather emerge and define each other through their interactions. So now, interconnectedness kind of expands a little bit. It's not just flows and processes, it's something more concrete. It's interactions, which is similar to Schrodinger's cat, specifically the Gendon-Gendon experiment that he came up with, the diabolical cat in the box. Now, what we tend to know Schrodinger's cat as is a cat in a box that's in the state of in a position where it's both dead and alive at the same time. But as a matter of fact, it's more than that. It's horrifically more than that. So you put a cat in a box, it's sealed for both the inside and the out. But there's more. There's a decaying isotope that's measured by a Geiger counter. If this isotope decays one single atom, the Geiger counter measures it, it releases a hammer that drops onto a flask of hyaluronic acid, which explodes and kills the cat. Which is pretty messed up, isn't it? But what this is basically saying is that quantum occurrences, such as a decaying isotope in a diabolical box, can affect macroscopic outcomes. So in essence, interconnectedness now is not just flows and connections, it's empirical study that can be proven by quantitative means. The small world is now connected to the big world. So this theory that I'm coming up with sort of mixes and matches all these different types of interconnectedness. So the claim that I make is that philosophical connections can be formed between any two static entities based on their shared quantitative data. Which is a lot of big words, but essentially that just means that everything can be connected to everything else if you look closely enough at their empirical structure. And while that's kind of the layman's way of explaining it, there are each aspects of this theory that have to be, explained and defined. So for instance, a philosophical connection. We're forming a philosophical connection. What is a philosophical connection? In essence, it's just, it's this sort of intangible connection based off of a priori principles. So for instance, you can say that all people are connected through culture and tradition, which is cool and all, but that's not something that you can exactly, measure and quantify. You can similarly to what Whitehead and Barad say that all matter in the universe is connected, which in their theories is a really interesting take. But again, they don't measure it tangibly. They just sort of make the claim that things are connected. So we're forming this sort of philosophical connection based off of sort of something that's intangible. So something we do have tangible is static entities. So this is a term that I came up with to basically quantify an object at a specific spatiotemporal point. For example, you at the exact moment of that clap, the dilation of your pupils, the beats per minute of your heart, your body temperature, your empirical structure in an exact moment in time, frozen, that you can measure and use to sort of base this quantitative data off of, which we'll touch on in a second. And I will sidebar before getting to that. I don't know if we have any quantum physics nerds here in the group. I understand that we do have indeterminacy and uncertainty principle, which claims that you are not allowed to measure the quantitative data of one specific entity at a point, which I would love to debate. If you want to ask me any questions on that, let's bring it up in the question section, but for now we'll just power through and get to the last part of the theory, which is quantitative data. So how do we figure out what exactly quantitative data is? How do we encompass that? So if we're going to create a definition for it, it's basically just data that is derived from objective experimentation or study. So something that's quantifiable, tangible, something that is proof, that is logic. So for instance, you could say, you can measure the range of human hearing based off of the measurements from an audiometer. Remember that. So what? So who cares? What does any of this matter? Now we get to the fun part of the fiction. So I'm using Project Hail Mary as a case study to apply this theory to. And I will give you the base summary of it. I cannot give you good enough words to explain this novel. If you haven't read it yet, please go home after this, buy the book, read it. It's amazing. But in essence, it basically just follows Ryland Grace. He's this middle school teacher turned astronaut who has to go on this crazy voyage into interstellar space to stop this solar dimming event that's caused by this alien amoeba. He has this curious case of retrograde amnesia, so the story kind of flips back and forth between him rediscovering his memories and trying to figure out this solution. He comes across a lot of difficulties, but he also comes across an unlikely ally who kind of helps him figure out his memories and how to solve this situation together. So who's his unlikely ally? It's this creepy rock-looking spider thing called Rocky. So we have the two main characters in the story, Ryland Grace and Rocky. So we are going to use them as a case study to apply this theory to. We must understand who they are as beings. So we have Ryland Grace, who is a human being. He lives on Earth in the solar system, or solar star system as we call it. He's about 180 pounds, anywhere from 5 feet 8 to 6 feet flat. He lives in one atmospheric unit of oxygen, nitrogen, argon, a few other trace gases. We all know our atmosphere. And then we have, on the complete opposite side of the spectrum, Rocky. So he is what they call an Iridian. That's because he's from the 40 Eridani star system. He's about 370 pounds, anywhere from 1.5 feet to 2 feet tall, and he lives in 28 atmospheric units of pure ammonia. So as you can imagine, two completely different beings. It's hard to imagine that they have anything in common, but they do. They share the similar range of hearing. So humans can hear anywhere between 16 hertz and 20,000 hertz, or 20 kilohertz, whereas Rocky, this Iridian, can hear both below and above that range. But his range of hearing does fall into this range of 16 hertz and 20 hertz. So how do we know that? Where are we coming up with these numbers? Well, for human beings, it's pretty easy. We have the 2004 JASA study that was done that basically adjusted the standard of human hearing by about 0.4 decibels from the lower end. So it went from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz to now being adjusted by 0.4 decibels on the lower side to 16 hertz and 20 hertz, 20 kilohertz, 20,000 hertz. And that's cool and all. We have an empirical study now that proves this range of hearing. But if we're going to measure averages of hearing, we have to apply it to an average human. So how are we going to understand that Ryland Grace is an average human that has an average range of hearing? Well, this is where we look to literary evidence. So we do have, I have these quotes, you probably can't read them from the back, but in essence, he mentions that the first time that he hears Rocky speak, in essence, was just kind of like whale song. He makes a note that the sounds coming from Rocky are within his range of hearing. So we can deduce that he has a range of hearing. Well, how do we know it's an average range of hearing? He goes on this long rant about how there's nothing wrong with him. He has no lumps on his head. He has nothing wrong with him. He's waking up from a coma, but he's in perfect health. Not only is he in perfect health, he's ripped. So not only is he healthy, he's a healthy average male, which we can deduce from both the quantitative data and the literary evidence. And he therefore has an average range of hearing from 16 hertz to 20 kilohertz. But what about Rocky? That's an alien that doesn't exist. How do we find quantitative data to prove his range of hearing? So we're going to flip the script and first look at literary evidence. So what we note is that there is an experiment that Ryland does to discern how Rocky hears. He doesn't have any eyes, so how does he move around in his surroundings? So what he does is he goes and he grabs an aluminum plate and he holds it up, and behind the plate he lifts different numbers of fingers. And Rocky, on the other side of a separated wall of solid xenon, which is called xenonite, doesn't exist by the way, he lifts his own weird little Rocky fingers and mimics him. How? How does he do that? He's not emitting any sound, but he's somehow taking in this ambient sound from his environment and processing it to understand his surroundings. Well, so this study was done with 1/16 inch of aluminum. And it's pretty interesting that he brings that up in the story because there just so happens to be a government-funded study that was done with 4 different widths of aluminum plates, one of which just so happens to be 1/16 inch width. What are the odds, right? But this study was basically done by shooting BB pellets at different widths of aluminum plates, and it basically measures the the transit times of compressional waves through solid metal. What this basically means is we're measuring the speed of which sound travels through a material. So aluminum, as it was discovered, the transit time of sound through aluminum is about 4.02 microseconds per inch, which is fast, but it's not instantaneous. So not only does Rocky have to hear the sounds of fingers moving through this plate of aluminum, he also has to hear it through a plate of solid xenon, and also through this tunnel that they're interacting in. It's absurd, this range of hearing that he must have. And using this quantitative data, we must, deduce, wow, like he must hear an insane amount, which is cool and all. It's so cool that we found this empirical study that proves this. We also have a quote from Rocky that says, I do hear much higher frequency and lower frequency than humans. So he also just says it himself. I thought it was cool that we found a study, but whatever. So in essence, we can deduce from all this that Rocky's range of hearing falls below and above this range of 16 hertz to 20 kilohertz. So we now have, in our theory, our quantitative data, which is cool. But how are we going to apply that to static entities? We're reading a book here. It's not exactly like we can clap our hands and measure something in real life. It's a book. I mean, they're not real. So in essence, instead of taking a clap and measuring from that, we should just pull them out of a scene. This is kind of the easy way that we could do this. For instance, this scene where Ryland Grace conducts this experiment with the fingers and deduces that Rocky has this nature of a passive sonar, in essence. So what we could pull from is this exact quote, chapter 11, page 189. That's proof. He's not just using light to perceive what's going on, it has to be sound. The exact moment of realization is what makes these two static entities. Our static entities are Rocky and Ryland at the point of realization, right? So now we have our quantitative data that proves these ranges of hearing of these static entities at this exact moment. So now we just have to do the fun part, come up with a philosophical connection. What does this data mean? What does this data applied to these static entities mean? And this is the fun part where you can come up with, well, here's what I think it means, here's what I think it means. What I think it means is that despite their vast differences in space and evolution, Rocky and Ryland somehow both developed the same range of hearing. So, in essence, they're like cosmological brothers, two completely different beings from completely different areas of the universe. Completely different empirical structure, different, you can even say culture and everything, completely different. Somehow managed to develop this same similar empirical state, right? So if you were to apply this to, say, like a literary study or a philosophical study, how would you format this into a hypothesis? If you take all of this data, you could make the claim that Rocky and Ryland, at the point of passive sonar discovery, are philosophically connected through their overlapping ranges of hearing. And there are so many implications that I can just imagine that this could be applied to, specifically in literary study. You could use this theory to sort of serve as quantitative evidence to support literary evidence. You could use it as empirical study on its own if you want to discover, or rather dive into philosophical means and empirical study. I would love to just discuss more about this, but I do see that I'm reaching the end of my time. So I will end it there. Thank you so much for this. Thank you.